Good morning and welcome to the Daily Tanya, and it's good to be back, as you can see, Baruch Hashem. And let's begin with tzedakah. So today is Tuesday. It is the 16th day of Shevat. And today we're going to conclude chapter 24. The Alter Rebbe talks about how all mitzvahs are equal and all sins are equal. And the question that we're going to ask, is it really so? Are all sins really equal before God? It seems like we find differences between sins. For example, we have the three cardinal sins that the Torah says, Yehoreg ve'al yaver, one should give up his life. So not to violate those three sins. Those are the sins of idolatry and murder and adultery. So it seems like those are not all sins are equal. And so the Alter Rebbe is going to argue that this is not the case. Even though some mitzvahs you have to give up your life and some not, still that doesn't mean that they're not equal, but because ultimately all mitzvahs are a violation of God's will. And in that sense, all mitzvahs are equal. And it's going to prove it also, we're going to see soon, that they're equal to the other verses, to the other sins. But yet, we do see that also the punishment for the cleansing for the sins are not equal by all sins. So what is it? So we need to make a clarity in this question. And to use a metaphor, to use an example to give us some clarity, is think about relationship. After all, our relationship with God is in many places compared to a relationship between spouses. So when you are in a relationship with your spouse, you're basically into it together. You're connected, you are in the relationship. Now, sometimes a person can do something which violates that bond. So it could be a small thing and could be a big thing. The moment a person lies to the spouse, and a person, even if it's not such a bad thing, even if you just do something that you know your spouse doesn't like. Your wife doesn't like you to leave the pants on the bed. You want you to put it in the dirty laundry. And you decide, you don't want to do it. In a sense, at that moment, you're saying, I don't care. I don't care about my relationship right now. But obviously, there is certain red lines that you wouldn't cross. Different people have different red lines. Obviously, and the red line that would damage the whole relationship is being promiscuous. For other people, a red line would be most of us would not raise their hand, not be violent toward the spouse, not be emotionally abusing the spouse. So this could be different red lines for different people. But what is common among the common denominator here is that when a person feels that he's in a relationship with a spouse, he doesn't want to sever this relationship. And as soon as a person does something which severs the relationship, in a way, it's like going against your spouse. And similarly, when you're doing a mitzvah, when you're doing violating a mitzvah, violating a transgression that God says don't do, it could be a big thing, could be a small thing. It doesn't matter. Because once a person goes against God's will, is denying God, is denying this relationship. Says, I don't care about this. But the difference is what happens after. Once the damage was done, in order to fix the damage, there is a difference between what you did. And a person did a terrible and big transgression, the damage takes longer, it's harder to fix the damage, to fix this relationship. And some things, the fixing is impossible. So this is the differences between the sins, as we're going to see soon, what happens after. But the point here is, what the Alter Rebbe is bringing out, is that every transgression is equally severing our connection with Hashem. Yes, God forgives, and we can fix the problems. But there is a difference. What was the transgression? But damaging the relationship is equally by all sins. So let's see what the Alter Rebbe explains this. Says the Alter Rebbe, "Umar shepikuach nefesh doiche she'ar aveiros v'gam yaveg v'al yoreg." It's true, we find the principle that saving a life overrides other prohibitions, though not the prohibition of idolatry. And similar, the law sometimes calls for one to commit a transgression rather than be killed. When it comes to regular mitzvahs, the Torah says, don't give up your life. For example, if a person is sick and he needs to save his life, and comes Shabbos, even on Shabbos, you have to do anything. You have to desecrate the Shabbos in order to save the person's life. Says the Alter Rebbe, the reason why this is so is not because your life is more important than Shabbos. It is because the Torah says, I want you to desecrate this Shabbos so that you can be keeping more Shabboses. Hainu, as says the Alter Rebbe, kepirush Chazal, Omra Torah chalel olav Shabbos achas, kedei sheishmo Shabbos esabed. This fact that saving a life overrides other prohibitions is because the sages, as the sages explain, that the Torah declares, desecrate one Shabbos for his sake, so that he may live to observe other Shabboses. It is not because of the relative leniency of the Shabbos or gravity of the sin, such as idolatry, that one is waived while the other is not. What is he saying? The Alter Rebbe says, on the one hand, when it comes to idolatry, where a person is commanded to give up his life. When it comes to Shabbos, a person is commanded to desecrate the Shabbos. So does that mean that idolatry or adultery is more severe? The gravity is a more strict mitzvah than Shabbos? After all, for this you die, and for Shabbos you don't die. Says the Alter Rebbe, that is not the case, and he brings proof that this is not the case, because we find, says the Alter Rebbe, we find that in certain cases, Shabbos is even worse, is more severe, more strict. The gravity of Shabbos is much more than Avodah Zarah, than the idolatry or adultery. And the proof is as follows. We know there is a law regarding the kosher meat. Kosher meat you have to have slaughtered by a sheichet. Person does the shechita, slaughters the animal in a kosher way. But not everybody can be a sheichet. You have to be qualified to be a sheichet. Obviously, you have to know the laws and everything. But if a person is a sheichet and he doesn't keep Shabbos, then you cannot eat from the slaughtering of that person. And yet, when it comes to the other things, if let's say a person is violating the other mitzvahs like adultery, if that person commits adultery, and he went and he slaughtered an animal. Okay, I don't know if I will eat from his shechita, from this slaughtering, but the fact is that the law says that his shechita is not like not like one who doesn't keep Shabbos. So we see in that sense, although when it comes to adultery, one needs to die not to commit adultery, but when it comes to disqualifying the person as being a sheichet, in his case, Shabbos is more severe. If a person violates Shabbos, it disqualifies his slaughtering. But if he violates adultery, it doesn't disqualify his shechita, his slaughtering. So that proves that this is the reason why the Torah says, don't commit, even if you have to give up the life of these sins, these three cardinal sins, and not for Shabbos. It's not because Shabbos is less severe. It is just because God decided that these three things one should give up his life. For whatever reason, God decided so. That's what the Alter Rebbe says. Teida shari Shabbos chamura ushkula kaved azora le'inyan shchitas mumer ledavar echad beyeredei siman beis. This contention is supported by the following fact: violating a Shabbos, violating of a Shabbos, is a grave offense and comparable to idolatry with regard to the laws of shechita by anyone who habitually violates a particular precept. It's codified in Yeridea, section 2. But a habitual sexual offender, one who commits adultery, for example, on the other hand, does not have the same law applied to him as habitual idolater. So what does it tell you? It's indicating that the violation of Shabbos is graver than the sexual offense. And nevertheless, when it comes to giving up your life, Shabbos you don't, and for adultery you do. Yet, the consideration of life overrides Shabbos, but not the sexual prohibitions. Rather, he says, it is a scriptural decree that consideration of life overrides other sins, but not the three cardinal sins: idolatry, sexual offense, and murder. So this, basically what the Alter Rebbe says is that the bottom line is not all sins are equal. When it comes to a person committing a sin, it separates a person from Hashem. The difference now is, however, what happens after the sin is committed, how to fix the damage that was caused. There may be a difference. However, it says after the sinful act, however, if the sin is of the type that carries neither the penalty of karet, which is spiritual extinction of the soul, or death at the hands of heaven, there are certain sins that when a person violates them, the person would die before the age of 50 or 60. So if this sin that a person committed is not one of those mitzvahs, in which case the divine soul does not completely perish and is not entirely cut off from its source in the living God, except that through this sin, its attachment to its source and its connection with it has been weakened somewhat. This is all the mitzvahs cause damage in this connection between the person and Hashem. Now, corresponding to the extent and specific nature of the blemish caused by the sin in the soul and in its source in the supernal worlds, the various purifying processes and punishment in purgatory or in this world, meaning the suffering of the soul in purgatory or one suffering in this world, whose purpose is to purify the soul. What is the Alter Rebbe saying? That, what, as we said before, that the different levels of sin that cause different levels of damages in the soul. It needs to purification, just like the different depends on what type of violation, what type of offense one did to his spouse. If it's a small thing, if it's a little thing, then the fixing it takes easier. And the same thing it says, the cleansing of the punishment of the sins, the purgatory or sufferings in this world, this is all a process of cleansing the sins, cleansing the soul. And different sins take different processes of how to cleanse the person, how to cleanse the soul. For each transgression and sin, it's appropriate punishment for the purpose of cleansing and removing the stain and the blemish caused by that specific sin. Similarly, the blemish caused by the sins carrying the penalty of death at the hands of the heaven, or karet, which is excision, it varies from one sin to another. They're not all equally causing the damage to the soul. But in any case, going back to the point, he says, "Arigam nafshe chiyunis of abahamis amolobeshes begufoi v'chein gufoi choizrim v'oilim me'asiter ache beklipezu u'miskarvim lekdushas nefesh aleikis amolobeshes bem." So to return to the original point, says the Alter Rebbe, after the sinful act, in the case of those sins, which do not carry the punishment of karet or death in the hands of heaven, the sinner's animal soul, which animates the body and is clothed in it, as well as his body itself, they return and rise from the sitra achra, the other side, and kalipa, whereto they descended when the sin was committed. A person commits a sin and drags the person down. When he does teshuvah, it elevates him. And they draw closer to the holiness of the divine soul that pervades them. Amarim b'Hashem echad. The divine soul always believes in the one God. V'gam b'sh'as hachet oisa ba'am ne'iteh. The godly soul, the divine soul, remains faithful to him even while the sin is being committed. That's why a Jew, when he commits a sin, he cannot really enjoy the sin fully. He has the guilt feeling, somehow subconsciously. Some more, some less. But you have this guilt feeling, even when a person commits a sin, he says, I still believe in Hashem. You have a Yetzer Hara, drags the person down, but he still believes in Hashem. So this divine soul, when a person commits a sin, is in a state of exile. Big pity on the divine soul. It's trapped. It's imprisoned in the body, in the temptations of the physical body. But at that time, the divine soul was in a state of veritable exile in the animal soul, which derives from the sitra acha, from the other side. Which causes the body to sin and drags it down with itself to the lowest depths. As low, in fact, that it is even lower than the impurity of the sitra acha. In the clip of the idolatry, may God preserve us. That's as we explained yesterday, that when a person commits the sin, then at that moment is being dragged down even lower than the evil itself, because the evil itself, after all, serves a purpose. God placed it in this world for whatever reason, to test us, to try us, to give us challenges. But the point is that it's serving God's purpose. But when a person with his free choice chooses to listen to the other side, it is being dragged down even lower than them. There is no greater exile than this exile of the divine soul within the animal soul that is brought on through sin. It is a plunge from the lofty roof to a deep pit. For as explained earlier, that the source and the root of all Jewish souls is in the divine wisdom. And what is the divine wisdom, as we said? And God and His wisdom are one and the same. And sin plunges the soul from this lofty plane to the depth of the exile within the Sitra Achra, the other side. And the Alter Rebbe uses a metaphor to describe the deep offense that this causes to the neshama, to Hashem. He says it's just like you're holding the head of the king and you're plunging it down in a toilet full of excrement. Even if it's momentarily, what a terrible humiliation. It is comparable to one who seizes the king's head, drags it down, and dips his face in a privy full of filth. This is the ultimate in humiliation. Even if he does it only for a moment. For the klippes and the sitra acha, they are called vomit and filth, as is known. So this is, the Alter Rebbe concludes here in this chapter to describe the severity of all sins equal. And even though we see the differences is not in the very act of separating from Hashem, but this is the same by all mitzvahs. And what is the takeaway from here? Is how Hashem is committed to be with us, no matter how low a person falls. So number one, we have to realize what we do. But in the same time, we have to realize that even if we fall in the lowest places, Hashem allows Himself, so to speak, to be dragged down to the place full of filth by way of our actions. And ultimately, when we realize that, we can do teshuvah, we can elevate ourselves and not commit those sins, even if it's a simple thing. We should always stay connected, even if it's only momentarily connected to Hashem. And this is the end of today's shir. and we'll see you tomorrow, Mezat Hashem.